I'm going to go on the hill and then I'll be back. And he always came back. And so I think he sets the greatest example for that is sometimes we need to say, oh.
Yeah, I like this. I like it already. All right.
I should be like,
I like it already. James, you are officially our permanent producer.
Oh my goodness.
No, is that, am I?
Kurt.
you're the boss.
Well, hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode of our On Purpose Parents podcast. We're just so thrilled that you guys would take 25 minutes or so out of your busy schedule to join us every week. Those of you who do join us every week, I don't know. I doubt if anybody joins us every week.
Maybe.
Do you think?
Somebody.
Does your
One
wife?
person.
They need to get up. Does my wife?
Husband?
Maybe.
Does my wife?
I didn't ask.
No. No. Rachel has listened to 3 of these probably.
Come on, Rachel.
Come
Tune
on.
in.
Show us some love,
Like
Rachel.
and subscribe.
That's when you go, Rachel,
leave
if you're
us a
listening to this
comment.
one, I'll buy you free Starbucks. Let's see it. There we go. See if she listened to it. No, don't tell her.
Oh.
See if she
Nice.
listened.
So wait.
And Sam.
And you can't say
If
anything.
she references this one,
'Cause-
you'll buy her free Starbucks.
Yeah, I'll get her Starbucks. Same with Sam.
Same
with
okay.
Sam.
So don't say anything. So
Wow.
both of them come up. So if you're hearing this, come find me.
I
I'll
love
get you Starbucks.
this.
Your money is safe, Amy. Your money
And now
is
we'll know the
totally
truth if we're
safe.
like, did you listen to the episode? Oh, they were great. And if they never
gonna-
mentioned Starbucks.
I'm going to get a little bit riskier because this is episode 2
Yes.
without producer Chris.
Yes.
If Chris listens to this one, I'll buy him free Starbucks.
Oh my goodness.
I'm gonna.
You can't tell, James.
Is that did I just guaranteed lose my?
James is like, where's my free Starbucks?
I feel like he's probably going to watch. I don't think he's a listener. I think he's a
Well,
watcher.
watcher.
That's okay.
Watcher.
Watching.
Yeah, I think
With
he's
audio?
probably. I feel like he's probably going to watch it.
There's not nearly as many watchers as there are listeners,
I don't know.
which is I get my insecurities my insecurities rise to the surface because I'm constantly telling people, "Oh, go check it out on YouTube," and yet on YouTube there's only 95 views or 200 views, but on
Recently, they're
downloads,
in the
listen-
thousands.
Well, collectively over
No,
time,
no.
Hundreds
Each video.
of thousands.
each hundreds
Yeah.
of thousands. Oh, well, there you go.
Yeah.
Why are we rambling on about this? I don't know. I have no idea. Okay,
That's
everybody.
why it works better on audio.
Producer humor over there.
Producer James.
Thank you, James. Well, Amy, thanks for joining us. As always, Kurt Johnston, Grace Yoon.
Hello, hello.
And we are in the middle of a 3-episode series with our good friend and pastor, Amy Kendall, talking about mental health
Yes.
with our children.
Yes.
And last episode was a little bit of an introduction, but they all kind of stand alone. So it's not like every episode is building on each other, but we just wanted to take this big subject and break it into 3 episodes. And we are just scratching the surface. Mental health with our kids is a big deal. And raising children and teenagers who we know have been diagnosed or we're wondering if they are where they are in that journey it's not an issue that we can tackle, check off, and solve as parents all in 3 podcast episodes. It's an ongoing journey, an ongoing conversation, an ongoing discovery. And we're just thrilled, Amy, that you're here. Your son is 20 years old.
Yes.
And when would you say you first he was first diagnosed? And is there an age where you're like, hey, before a certain age, diagnoses maybe aren't as accurate or they're not as common and there's maybe a sweet spot, or is it different for every kid? Is it different for every mental health?
It's different for every diagnosis.
Okay.
Yeah. I would say my son was probably 1 when I was like, he's toe walking a lot. And for a lot of parents, toe walking can go hand in hand with autism, which is also a mental health disorder. And so, but he was very talkative and had eye contact.
But not always.
But not always.
They could just be a future ballerina.
You know what? Or they have sensory processing disorder,
have sensory processing
so
disorder.
they're seeking out that input into their bodies. Where typical when you walk, you don't always you can feel your legs, but when you walk on your toes, it's amazing how you can feel your legs.
Interesting.
So a lot of people who have sensory processing disorder, just quickly, they're either seeking out input or they're shying away from input. And so my son was a seeking out input kind of person, and so they're the kids when they're 2 that they're taking all the toys and they're slamming them across the floors and the tables at church or at school. They're ones that are kicking little Johnny next to them because as we're sitting here for you guys, can you feel your legs right now?
Right.
No, but if I kick Grace, or Grace kicks me. Do you feel your leg? Yeah. And so that, intrinsically they're just doing that because they're trying to get that input to see where their body is. So at a young age, I saw that. And so I think with each diagnosis, there's a different, ADHD definitely starts playing in school age. I remember them trying to, thinking he had it when he was in preschool. And I was like, yeah, no, I think it's sensory processing. But it was probably in third grade where we finally was like, yeah, school's getting more challenging. There's needing a lot more attention. Homework is getting a little bit longer. And that's when we saw that. And then I think through that, then he would start getting more and more anxious. And then the anxiety came in. And then we were seeing the OCD. And then his Tourette's usually comes on typically in early adolescence, but it can go different ways. But probably when he was in second grade, we started seeing him like do this like eye bulging thing where he like, I couldn't even do it, but he would try to like strain his eyes because it was just, a thing. And then he started having a little bit of a sound. So for a long time, we just thought it was a tic disorder. Yep. And because I did not want to have that label on him, that was probably a little bit of my denial. Sure. And then again, we talked the first episode about duration and how that really is. And so with the difference of tic disorder and Tourette's has to do with duration, and also it has to do with verbal versus movement. And so. Right. So he had all his diagnoses by the time he was in fifth grade. We had all of them. Gotcha. And then some of them have waxed and waned, and some have stayed. And Tourette's, it's a 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. In late adolescence, 1/3 get better, 1/3 get worse, and 1/3 stay the same. And
gotcha.
He's a stay the same kind of kid. So he'll probably have Tourette's his whole life. OCD is much better. He got therapy for that. So there's some things that. There's some things of mental health that we can get help, and we can definitely dissipate some of the symptoms that come with it. And there's some things like autism that are usually there for the rest of our lives, or Tourette's.
Yeah. And is it fair, Amy, to say that with most or some mental health diagnoses that as you get older, you certainly sometimes rarely can learn to manage it yourself and like maybe control, forgive me if I'm using the wrong, like control symptoms or.
Yeah, no, I definitely, I'll take my son has obsessive compulsive disorder, and he definitely got therapy for it. And he got it when he was like 16, maybe a little younger. And he really learned what he needed to do when those obsessive thoughts come in. Because what happens is you get an obsessive thought, and then you do something, you do a compulsion, because it's like it goes hand in hand. And so he would have those things. And so he got therapy, and so he knows kind of what his triggers are, what sets him off, and he knows how to talk himself through it. And so, I think for a lot of things, I think as we get older, and especially become adults, we learn like, okay, what do we need? But it doesn't mean that we can't. Some things, some things can set us down the trail where we have a full blown, episode of a manic.
Well, and that's part of what's so great about the times that we're living in. And we touched on this in the last episode about how we're just living in a season where, as a culture, we're just more open about stuff. And we're more willing to talk about our challenges, and there's more help available. Yeah. And so, back in the day, even when I was growing up or when I was raising my kids, some of what your son deals with, like, we would have probably not wanted to talk about it. And then when you don't talk about it, you don't get the help. And then you don't give the tools to your child to help them navigate it in the way that we're providing for so many kids and teenagers today, which is really one of those like awesome areas that we've progressed, and we're just doing better as humans in this area.
And you said something at the last episode, Amy, that I'm wondering if you could say again for people who might just be tuning in for this episode, and I can't quite remember. It was that like disability, you have like two mantras.
Oh, different isn't defective.
Yes. I love that different isn't defective. And to Kurt, what you were saying is, I think underlying it, and even now, but maybe even more in the past, different was thought of as defective. Right. And so if you are going through these things, you have to just kind of deal with it on your own as a parent. And that causes a lot of stress to the parent, causes stress to the kid, because you do feel like something's wrong with you, and you're probably not getting the support, not the emotional support, but other kinds of support that you do need. Thank you, Amy. I mean, just hearing you talk about your son's experiences, and I know you said in last episode that he's totally okay with you sharing these stories and it's part of your ministry. Just even hearing that is like so like just helpful to say, oh, okay, like this is what you've been through and this is what you've experienced in either diagnosis or treatment or just communication and building relationships. And I really think, and that's why we're excited about this series, is that there are parents out there who are facing this in their families. And some may be further along in having support and some may be completely alone right now. And we just want those parents that are listening in now, maybe if this is the first episode, to go back and listen to the first one. We are doing a 3-episode series. The whole intent is to encourage parents that they're not alone in this particular journey, and different isn't defective, and that there are things that you can do as a parent. So
just one of the things, a long time ago, I went to see, I saw a doctor. He's speaking on the challenges of having kids with disabilities and mental health and everything. And one of the things he talked about was denial. And I'm sure all of us know that we make that joke about, oh, they're going down the river, the river of denial. And the one thing he talked about, and I was so appreciative, is he said, denial is actually a really healthy place. Because when we're in denial, it means that we don't have the either inward resources or the outward resources to move forward. And so for us to sometimes like get frustrated with family members or even, ourselves or anybody else and see them in denial, we need to, one, have grace, of course, but to remember, like, they don't have that ability. Maybe they don't have family members who are like, hey, I know this is challenging. You're going through this with your child. I'm here to lock arms with you and help you through it.
Gotcha. Okay, so
it's almost like a coping mechanism until you feel safe.
It's not a healthy place to be, but it can be a healthy moment when people
when you don't have anything else.
When people in our lives recognize that and go, oh, Amy's in denial, but that's actually good that we see that, because that tells us where we can help out, because she's lacking the resources. She's at a stopped point, but it's not. I'm just clarifying. It's not a good place. Sense. It's not a healthy place for me to live in a state of denial.
No, but I think there are times that we can't push people through it if they're not, like I said, we may even lock arms with them and they may not have the inward resources. And so it is about just letting people know we're there, letting them know we're supporting them, giving them resources, and then they can build that. Because sometimes people just, I've met parents who sometimes they can't even get to that place because maybe they see it themselves. Because we do know a lot of mental health is genetic. And so there's just different things. So but it was just a really interesting, it's always been a good perspective for me to remember when I meet a family who is in that place is to meet them where they're at. And because one, mental health, if you met someone with mental health, you've met one person with mental health, because everyone's story is different.
Right.
Yeah, these are such great little like
nuggets.
Yeah, I'm like each time I'm like, oh my gosh, I feel like
different is not defective.
Right.
Your weakness is your witness. That was the other thing she shared. And I just lost it. You just said something else really good.
You met one person with mental illness. You've just met one
person.
Everyone has their own story and everyone's their own unique journey. So speaking of the journey as parents, maybe who are struggling with mental illness themselves and or have children that have mental health challenges, what are some ways that either you've experienced or that advice you can give to parents in this situation where you can give yourself some self-care while at the same time supporting your child with these challenges?
I think that's really important, because I think as parents, we tend to put ourselves on the back burner anyway. I mean, take out mental health, and all of us being parents, James, you included, the reality is we may come home exhausted and your kids are like, daddy, mommy, and off we go. And sometimes I know that there were times that Caden, my son, was really struggling, and I couldn't be there. I was no good for him. Like my bucket was empty. And so I had to a point say to him, like, you know what, I need you to give me like 30 minutes. I'm going to go take a shower or whatever you need to do to I'm going to go for a run. I would never say that, but I would say I'd go for a walk. Theoretically. But I'm going to, I'm going to go sit down and watch this one TV show. Give me 30 minutes and then we'll come back. And the reality is I think everyone can take 30 minutes and just say, I'm going to get back. And so also, spending time with friends. It's easy to isolate ourselves when we're going through those things because we feel like people don't understand. We're weary. No one wants to hear the story. No one understands me. And the reality is in this day and age, all of us have had someone or gone through something challenging with a child. And so it's really taking care of yourself. And so making those times to put ourselves first. I think it's so easy because our child is in a heightened state of their struggle with mental illness that we forget about us. And it's not always, we always think like we're not supposed to be selfish, us as Christians are supposed to be out there. But the reality is Jesus set the greatest example when he went away. Like when everyone was swarming him, he was like, I'm going to go on the hill and then I'll be back. And he always came back. And so I think he sets the greatest example for that is sometimes we need to say, I need to go away for 30 minutes. I need to go away, whatever it is, but I'll be back and we can go over this. And no, I think, especially if your child is at home and sometimes even it's just like, I need to go to the bathroom. Let me go to the bathroom. And then you can kind of decompress, stop, say a little prayer, and then go to battle. Because sometimes it's a battle going out there.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And that the part of what you said that especially resonated was that there can be this tendency to isolate, especially, sometimes if you are a parent with young kids, it's a kind of can be an isolating season anyway, because you're just like, what the heck is going on? Especially if you're a first time parent. But if it's something that you're not comfortable with, like, oh, my child is different from my friend's kids and maybe they don't get along exactly the same, or there may be like some comments that you're not comfortable with, or all of these different things can lead to a fear of either embarrassment or shame or people not understanding. I could totally see that causing parents or a parent to withdraw. But what you're saying is if you're isolated, it's just that much harder for self-care. And that's why I think it's so grateful for you to come and just talk about it, because we want to break that stigma if that is there and just say, hey, we're through this podcast being very open about these issues and you can too as a listener. And that actually, in reality, if you do go out, there are a lot of people that could relate to you. And it is probably a lie that we think subconsciously that only I'm going through this. Yeah. Only my child is something's different with my child, whereas all my other friends' kids are totally normal and perfect and I don't belong. And that could be, a rural stigma. Yeah. So thanks for sharing that.
So much of self-care is oftentimes you gotta push against what comes naturally to take care of yourself, right? So naturally I want to eat tons of junk food. Self-care would say push against that, push against it. Naturally I want to stay up till 1 a.m. binge watching Netflix. Or self-care would say, get 8 hours of sleep.
Oh, really?
No,
I'm kidding. I was just joking with that.
I'm just kind of spinning hypotheticals.
It's my daily night routine.
And for a lot of parents, the way a lot of parents are wired is to lean, their world revolves around their children, right? They lean in, mama bears and helicopter parents, all that kind of stuff. And then when you pile on some of the mental health challenges, the natural response for a lot of parents is to, I just got to lean in even more. Right. And you do to some degree. You do have to lean in more in some ways. But you got to fight against that at times to take care of yourself, to be around your own circle of friends, to make sure you're getting your exercise, to make sure you're having, if you're a follower of Jesus, you're having time at the feet of Jesus, right? You're taking care of yourself. You got to fight against the urge to
that
lean
voice
in even more, because my child's going through a tough time. Somehow you got to do both. You got to lean in more, but you got to make sure that you're fighting the urge to neglect yourself along the way. And so much of what we're talking about, last episode and this episode, I'm going, Oh, that's parenting 101. That's parenting 101. That's parenting one. It's almost like, and I don't want to oversimplify it, but there's a little bit of, it's everything we're talking about is parenting, and then a little bit of extra when it comes to kids
Right. It could be amplified
with some mental health challenges.
Right.
But open communication, that's parenting 101. But make sure with your kids who are going through some mental health challenges that line of communication is open. Self-care, that's parenting 101. We've talked about self-care in the past. But man, it's even more important in these scenarios because of the tendency to neglect it because of the extra attention maybe required when you're parenting a child with some mental health challenges. Amy, talk to us about what are some tips or just some insight that you would share with a parent that says, look, how do I build into my child with some mental health challenges a sense of self-worth, a sense of accomplishment? How do I help them see the way God's wired them and that's a good thing and not a bad thing, and I can still contribute to the world and I've got something to offer, all of that. How do you help with that? And again, there's a little bit of, it's parenting 101, but it's different in these situations.
It can be, yeah. I remember so clearly where I was when Caden, my son, looked at me and he said, why did God make me like this? And of course, as a parent, you're like, oh my goodness. And so I think those were our mottos that we talked about came out of those. But at the same time, we talked about he's very bright. He's a very bright child. He has a really high IQ. He's very athletic. Sports have come really easy for him. And so we used to always say to him, we have to have something to keep us dependent on God. We had to have something, you couldn't be this well-rounded kid. You wouldn't need God. And so God uses those things. And so I think it's so important though also is that all of our kids have strengths. They all have things, when we were talking about self-care, even there's things to them that are fun and enjoyable and they like to do. And I think anytime we can really, give into that. I had a very wise woman named Rachel Johnson, who once talked to me on a car ride together, and that she was talking about how important it is when your child has something that they're interested in to really, engage in that and really help, And for my son at the time, he really loved animals and he wanted to do animal care at the time. He doesn't anymore, but at the time. And so, but finding kids, you may have a child who's really into a specific sport and so to be able to work with that and help and, get them involved in those sports or whatever it is, even if it's hey, let's go in the backyard and practice. Let's go out let's go to the local school and let's go try that together. Or, if they're anytime and I've always wanted to surf. Okay, let's go surfing.
Right.
And so I think anytime we can take them away from what encompasses them and those mental health things, because I think they already live in it so often that we can take things that are their pleasure, their fun. Mental health can be fun if you find those things, and find humor in it sometimes. I jokingly talk about in one of our videos when it talks about Tourette's that my son loves watching this YouTuber who, whenever he goes to a airport, he says, and goes on airplanes, he says bomb. And and so my son thinks it's hilarious. And granted, my son has Tourette's, so he understands it. Right. But the reality is he's able to find humor in those things. And there's some things that we can look at and find humor in. And it makes it more real and more just normal. Okay, everyone deals with things like that.
Well, and that's the thing is when we can to normalize stuff. And it's fair and honest to say that it's not normal to have Tourette's as far as, if normal being the typical, right? It's not typical.
It's not as common.
It's not as common, right? But you normalize it as best you can, because what we want to do as parents is we want to, whatever the challenge, if it's somebody they're super tall or they're not athletic at all, right? Okay. But you normalize the experience. You want their life to be as normal is a terrible word.
We don't use normal. We use typical.
Typical. We want their life to be as typical as it can be, right? So they don't feel like I'm an outsider. And just because because I have this challenge, now I'm an outsider in every arena of life.
I'm excluded.
I'm excluded, and I'm atypical in every area because of my depression or my anxiety or my Tourette's or my OCD. Trying to normalize as much of that as we can. And leaning into, as you were talking, Amy, I was just thinking about like leaning into the positives.
Yep.
And not saying, don't say, here I am. I'm not an expert, but my mind's just racing right now.
Yeah.
Like, don't say don't set limits for them. Don't say no for them. So, if you have a child with anxiety and they're saying, I want to do A, B, C, or D, well, why should their anxiety, it shouldn't be very limiting very often. Right. Lean into that. My buddy, this is not a conversation about disabilities, although Amy's a specialist in that as well. But one of my best friends is a special education teacher, and he's also a surfer. And he just had this. We were having coffee the other day, and just boom, the light bulb went off, and he said, "I'm gonna start special shred."
Oh,
because his junior high school, their surf team has won the junior high national championships like 15 out of the last 19 years.
Wow.
And he's like, I want to take special education kids who want to do it to the beach once a week with the surf team, and we'll figure out whatever they can do. And we're going to call it special shred. And it's genius. What he's doing is he's refusing to say no. You can't go to the beach and be a surfer.
Right.
You're in a wheelchair. Well, no, we'll figure out what does going to the beach.
They do have
like
surfboards,
we're going to normalize as best we can. And so I'm rambling, but I was just thinking.
Well, and if you look at look at Steve Jobs. Steve Jobs, we know more than likely was on the autism spectrum, and look what he created. I mean, look at Apple. I don't know the gentleman's name, but Pokemon, the guy who created Pokemon, he had mental health and disabilities, and look what he created. I mean, some of the most brilliant people. Look at Michael Phelps. Michael Phelps had severe ADHD and has won more gold medals than anyone in the world.
Yeah.
And so their mental health doesn't have a ceiling. Like we don't need to put a ceiling over mental health.
There you go.
Yeah. And that's such an encouraging word for parents, because I think, and it's with any kind of, parents in any situation, but it's very, very, very easy to get fixated on what's wrong or what we think is wrong. I mean, it's like all our thoughts laser focus.
Yes.
And I'm speaking from my personal experience, but also from, talking with friends. And it's like day in, day out, you're just like, oh my God, like, what can I do? I'm trying this. I'm trying this intervention. It's not working. Like, and everything gets zoned in and honed in, and then you become especially sensitive. And so when things don't go right as a parent, you're just like, get discouraged and anxious. And this is such a liberating message. It's not saying ignore your child's needs, and if there's interventions or if there's therapy work involved, that's still there.
Don't be in denial.
Don't be in denial, and don't isolate. However, hey, maybe is there something in your situation, something positive, something good, something of a strength in your child that maybe your fixation on the issue is causing you to miss. And that's an opportunity that you're encouraging parents as don't miss that opportunity, because that can be such a beautiful and almost even healing thing, and just enjoying your child and enjoying their strength, and then allowing them to enjoy their strengths as well by going to the park and playing with their sports.
We had to, and I wouldn't recommend this for everybody, and I think you have to do a fine line, but there were times when school was too much. Like there was just so much, and I had to look at some of the things and say is this something that is really important for him to learn today? And so we had to say, and I know we'll talk about it more at a later podcast, but we had to sometimes go you know what, your mental health is more important. Let's go do what's going to feed your mental health and feed you feeling good about what's going on, versus no, your teacher says this is due tomorrow and you need to learn this because you're gonna have a test. And we had to say, you know what, pause. Let's not worry about this. Yeah. And I'll be really honest. There were nights that I was more concerned that my son was going to wake up the next morning and be alive, and I didn't care about schoolwork. And I had to say, you know what, I don't care. And I would have to tell teachers, this is not my priority. And most of the teachers as a whole, especially in this day and age, are pretty understanding of what's going on.
Right.
And for you as a parent to say, okay. And so we would do things that nurtured him versus things that were making him feel oppressed at times. Now, granted, very smart children will learn this really quickly and can use it against you. And so we had to have a fine line of like, you know what, we can't do it every day, but let's, you know, we have, this is what we set parameters. But there was times that we would just scrape everything that we knew and said, nope, we're going to do this instead because this is better for who you are right now.
That's awesome.
That's
As
really
you were
good.
talking earlier about Michael Phelps and Steve Jobs and
The guy who created Pokemon.
the guy
Pokemon
who
guy.
created Pokemon,
Sorry, Pokemon guy.
Pokemon man. I was thinking of she's been around a long time. Is it Joni Eareckson?
Joni Eareckson Tada.
Joni Eareckson Tada, right?
Who paints with her mouth.
Who paints with her mouth. I had a mantra since you're the queen of mantras with your weakness is your witness and different isn't
Not
Defective.
is not defective. I thought of don't let your limitations, because there are limitations. Joni Eareckson Tada has limitations, but don't let your limitations limit you. Did I get a name? No, anybody, anyone?
No, producer James.
Don't let your don't let your limitations limit you. Like is going back to the question that I asked as far as how do we? It's showing them role models of people who have faced similar challenges and what they've done and what the Lord has done through them, and just this reminder of everybody has things in their life that they're wrestling through and overcoming. And it's really unfortunate for some that the challenges are larger and to some degree more, they have some natural limitations built into them.
I think
But it doesn't have to limit us.
I think our teenagers are really driven towards personalities, you know, especially celebrities, whatever it is.
Yeah.
And so that's how our teenagers and our children are. For us to say like, oh, Tom down the street struggled with depression and look what he's doing now. But if you were to say, oh, this actor, actress, whatever, they're much more drawn to that. And so at a pretty younger age, I found role models like that for Caden. Like I said, like, look at Michael Phelps, look what he did. You know, look at some of the people who've had Tourette's. And so I would, you know, I would say, like now, look at Billie Eilish, look at Louis Capaldi, look at some of the people who are coming out as having Tourette's, and like, look what they're able to accomplish. And so I would, you know, choose like, hey, and now he laughs at me because I'll be like, oh, did you know so-and-so have Tourette's? He's like, yes, Mom. And so he like laughs at me. But, you know, I wanted to show him positive role models. You know, on the soccer team, there was a guy on the soccer team, one of the U.S. soccer team, men's soccer, the goalie who had Tourette's. And I'm like, and so my son's sports driven. So I was like, it didn't limit him.
Right,
and
right.
so it's finding also some people that they can strive to see like, oh, okay.
That's really powerful.
They're doing amazing things. I can do amazing things.
Yeah.
And like you said, no limit. And my son, I'm like, you can do anything. Just because you have Tourette's does not limit you because, your body moves and people may look at you differently. It doesn't mean that you can't be president of the United States.
Right.
If that's where you want to go, we're gonna support you 100% of the way.
That's awesome.
That's good.
Well, Amy, thanks for joining us. Everybody, thanks for listening. This is episode 2 of 3. If you have maybe some specific questions for Amy, or you would like some tips on some resources, you can email Amy Kindle. Her email is amyk, A-M-Y-K, amyk@saddleback.com. She would love to help you answer any
wealth
questions,
of resources.
dig a little deeper. We're just kind of scratching the surface on this really important and challenging and also wonderful journey that a lot of parents find themselves on. So thanks for joining us. As always, if you want to watch the most recent episode 1 of this series, you can do that right here somewhere. And you can subscribe right down here. We've got more and more subscribers every single week, more people subscribing to our podcast. Thank you. Share it with a friend. We'll see you soon.
Bye, everybody.